On a 3-year appointment from September 2018, she is the Gloria Steinem Chair in Media, Culture, and Feminist Studies at Rutgers University, senior correspondent at The Intercept, and of course, the author of the book you're all here for tonight, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal. Yay! Her book contains... Once again. Klein will be in conversation tonight with Betsy Reed, editor-in-chief of The Intercept, an award-winning news organization dedicated to holding the powerful accountable through fearless adversarial journalism. She's the former executive editor of The Nation, where she led the magazine's award-winning investigative coverage, and she has edited several best-selling books, including Going Rogue, Sarah Palin, An American Nightmare with Richard Kim. Required reading. And last but certainly not least, Jane Fonda, who will be joining the latter part of tonight's conversation. Fonda is an actress extraordinaire, author, political activist, and the recipient of various accolades, including 2 Academy Awards, 2 BAFTA Awards, 7 Golden Globe Awards, and the AFI Life Achievement Award, among many others. In addition, oh, yes, Jane Fonda. In addition to issues of civil rights, Fonda has been a staunch opponent of oil developments and their adverse effects on the environment. So first, please help me welcome to the stage Betsy Reed and Naomi Klein.
Welcome. Ooh, welcome. It's wonderful to be here with you in this beautiful space. It's great. I think I can't imagine a better and more important, if grave, moment to be having this conversation, and I can't imagine a better person to be talking with than my old friend and colleague Naomi Klein, who I worked with for many years at The Nation before The Intercept, and who has this fantastic new book out, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal. And I hope you enjoyed the video, which Naomi conceived along with the artist Molly Crabapple, which I think gives us a needed dose of hope in a dark time. On her book, On Fire, I just want to congratulate her because it's a fantastic achievement, and it was reviewed today in the New York Times, and the reviewer wrote probably the dream sentence an author would want. The first sentence of the review: if I were a rich man, I'd buy 245 million copies of Naomi Klein's On Fire and hand deliver them to every eligible voter in America. So, Naomi, I'd like to start by just asking you to set the scene a little bit for us, because it really does feel like a momentous time to be living through, where I think we all feel, and if you're here, you feel a sense of responsibility to this moment. And you have both an understanding of the climate science and the politics. So can you tell us how you feel at this moment?
Well, first of all, I'm just delighted to be here, to be back here at Sidwell, and to be launching yet another book in DC with the wonderful folks at Politics and Prose. It's becoming a tradition, and I really enjoy it so much. Thank you all for coming. Betsy, thank you for being here. And Jane, it's such an honor to be with you here. Truly a legend among us. And it's interesting. The book came out yesterday, so I'm still in that kind of rusty stage of talking about it. I always think whenever I'm on book tour, I always remember the first book I published 20 years ago was No Logo, and the book came out in French, and I went to France, and I was interviewed by a journalist there, and she said, you know, sometimes when the authors get to France, their ideas are like old chewing gum that's lost all of its flavor. And it is true that when you talk about a book, it does become like a little bit like old chewing gum that's lost all of its flavor. But for me, I'm in a very different phase. This is really just the second time I've talked about the book. So it's full flavor, and I'm still feeling my way around. And the truth is, you know, this question about how are you feeling, you know, what is this moment? It's complicated, and it really does depend on, you know, the hour, if not the second of the day. There are moments of just incredible inspiration and excitement, like Greta Thunberg, you know, testifying on Capitol Hill and submitting as her testimony the 2018 IPCC report, telling us that we had 12 years, now 11, and just saying, read it, then act. That was pretty great. Or going to a meeting, as I did an hour ago here in DC, of people who are planning on shutting down DC on Monday to declare a people's climate emergency. You know, or being at the launch of the book yesterday in New York with Varshini Prakash, the executive director of the amazing Sunrise Movement, who are here tonight, and just feeling all the energy that they have built up. They are building this incredible national youth movement that is so morally clear about both what we cannot have in terms of continuing down this road that is already so catastrophic, right? I mean, we are not, I guess, and also being so clear on what we want instead, and championing a vision of the future, which I think is absolutely critical. And I think we've made mistakes in the past in movements of just having our no, but being afraid to put forward our yes, the vision of what we want instead. So it's so beautiful to be able to be with Sunrise on this tour, to see the fearlessness around getting out of our issue silos. I think for a long time, a lot of us, I guess, sort of bought the idea that there was a sort of a scarcity, right? Like you've got to stick in your lane, and you've got to have goals that are modest enough that you can claim easy victories. And I think we're finally realizing that we're stronger together, and that we're stronger when we have the courage to come together and find our common vision for the kind of society we want to live in, instead of this one that is betting against people's futures on so many different fronts, right? Climate is the meta one. We're all inside the climate, but the truth is that this generation is seeing their lives bet against by political leaders who don't protect them from guns in schools, don't protect in any way immigrant youth from being wrenched from their families, don't protect Black youth from police, don't protect them from white supremacists and misogynists and transphobics and on when they go online. So it's really a moment where I think people are realizing that the system is failing on multiple fronts, and because of that, are less afraid of the kind of change we actually need, right? When I started writing about climate change and started linking it with our economic system, I got a lot of pushback from friends in the climate movement who said, you know, you're just making things harder. We can't make it sound so hard. Like, why are you weighing down climate with all of these other issues? You know, they're less popular. There was this feeling, right? And it was just so backwards, because the truth is that the people who are going to fight for the future we need up against really powerful forces, and this is a fight with powerful forces arrayed against us, whether it is the fossil fuel companies or whether it is the banks that finance them or the politicians who all them finance. We need a movement of people who have a lot to win, who have a lot to gain from change, who aren't afraid of change, right? And we're only going to build that kind of movement when we're willing to make alliances with folks who are on the front lines of all of these crises. So that's where I feel the hope. And it's such a big shift, honestly. It is a huge shift. The willingness to have that yes, the clarity of moral purpose, the understanding that we need change at a systemic level, an excitement about having transformations that are on the scale of the crisis that we face, not a fear of that, an excitement about it, not because it's better than climate apocalypse off in the future, but because it's better than Tuesday, right? Because it's better than the present. And that is a really, really big change. But, if we're talking about the climate clock, it's really frightening what's happening. And anybody who says that they just feel hopeful all the time is lying. That's not a rational reaction to the moment that we're living. This was the hottest summer on record. We have never had so little Arctic sea ice. We are losing huge swaths of the Amazon. We have lost much of the Great Barrier Reef. These are the major features of our planet: the Arctic, the Amazon, the Great Barrier Reef. And we are, as my friend Bill McKibben says, breaking them, right? So, this is not a crisis that's off in the future. It is a crisis that is stealing lives, homelands, futures right now in the Bahamas, Paradise, California. We could go on and on. And the arsonists are in charge in country after country, right? And there is a strange glee being taken by the Trumps and the Bolsonaros. Scott Morrison is coming over from Australia for the UNGA. They're all going to be palling around. Scott Morrison, Prime Minister of Australia, brought a hunk of coal into the House of Commons, sort of fondled it, held it up. I mean, he's, you know about this here in DC with the snowballs and so on. But things get so bad here, I think, in the US that I think there's a tendency to think, oh, it's just us, right? This is a global context where something really scary is happening in the sort of death throes of this ideological project. And so the urgency for the forces that really understand that it is now or never, right? That we have been given 11 years. I always see the Sunrise young people, they have these T-shirts that say 12 years that they printed up after that IPCC report came out. But it's 11 now. That report came out in October. It's almost October, right? And by the time there's a new administration, it will be 10. This is the thing about time. It marches on. So we just have to win, right? And we have this really narrow pathway, right? We've got to get somebody coming out of these primaries who gets it, who really, really gets it, who's running on a Green New Deal. They have to have a track record of taking on very powerful actors. It cannot just be about what they say. It has to be about their track record as well as what they say. And then, we got to take back the Senate and all of that, hold on to the House, and then stay organized, become more organized than we have ever been. Because the important thing about calling this a Green New Deal is that it reminds us of the old New Deal. And what you see, it's so interesting when you look at what was going on with popular mobilizations and strikes during the years of the original New Deal. You'd think when you were winning massive victories like Social Security, unemployment insurance, regulating the banks, that people might relax a little bit. But oh no, the strikes went up. 1934, 1935, 1936, 1937. The more they got, the more they striked, right? all of the most progressive elements of the New Deal, and there were many elements of the New Deal that were not progressive. African American workers were excluded from many programs. Domestic workers, women were excluded. Agricultural workers were excluded. This was a period of mass deportations of Mexican Americans. There was discrimination in the distribution of relief, particularly in the South. There were also programs for African American artists that were unlike anything this country has ever seen. The more people fought, the more they got. That is the lesson of the original New Deal, and it's a message that I think we really need to keep our eye on. So where we're at, not where we should be, better than where we were. Time marches on, and we have a hell of a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Thanks for that. So it does seem, thanks to you and many organizers and leaders, that the left and progressives are seeing the connections between the war on immigrants and the migration flows and the climate crisis that we're in the middle of. But the right is also making connections. You've written about the rise of eco-fascism.
Right.
What do you see as the threat emanating from the right?
Yeah, so we're going to get to the hopeful part. Don't worry. But first, we've got to go. We've got to go into the fire. So, yeah, I mean, the way I sort of map it is like, we have the climate fires, but we also have these political fires on the right, and they are also spreading. They are also contagious, right? We see these connections between these figures, this mutual admiration society that echoes around Twitter between Trump and Bolsonaro. Matteo Salvini in Italy, who is up until recently the interior minister in Italy, who had an overt let them drown policy when it came to migrants, would not let migrant boats dock. The first migrant boat in a very long time was allowed to dock in Italy last week. I have friends who go out on these boats. They talk about a Holocaust on the seas. There are so many thousands of people who are dying in the Mediterranean, and we do not know how many, because the whole policy is designed not to know, right? And they are saving lives, and they are racked with guilt because they know that if they had arrived 5 minutes later, not only would hundreds of people have drowned, but nobody would know and there would be no record, and that is happening every day. So we have these countries and continents that have these policies, which they call deterrence. Okay, Australia has the same policy. They have these offshore island detention camps in Nauru and Manus and Nauru. People are lighting themselves on fire. That is how desperate it is. In Europe, the whole strategy is to offshore it to these camps in Libya, and we're seeing it here. I don't think it's a coincidence that this kind of barbarism on the borders is happening in the moment that climate change is becoming undeniable, whether they deny it or not, by the way. None of them actually believe their own BS about whether or not climate change is happening. Trump has had to modify his golf courses because of sea level rise. So it's not about what they say, it's about the fact that they think they're going to be all right. They think their wealth is going to insulate them on an individual level and also within their countries. And so that's why their political projects for all of these figures is, to create a very defined in-group, right? A very defined circle of protection. The people, the real people, right? Whether it's the real Americans or the real Indians. And then these out groups inside countries and also outside, right? And to cast those others as the invaders, the criminals, the security threat, right? And we see this pattern repeat again and again. It's a very profitable pattern. It keeps people fighting with each other, fearing each other, and then they are free to plunder. But what we're seeing is the signals that are being sent by this type of politics is now being echoed by mass shooters in New Zealand and El Paso. I mean, the shooter in El Paso went into a Walmart, and he wrote in his manifesto that the reason he went to this Walmart where there were many Mexicans is because he was concerned about climate change, and that Mexicans cannot have the same quality of life as Americans. So he's protecting the American way of life. He said, Americans aren't going to change, but we have to keep immigrants from having our way of life. It's very explicit about it, extraordinary. And he had been inspired by the New Zealand shooter who'd gone into 2 mosques, killed more than 50 people. This is on March 15th. He defined himself as an ethno-nationalist eco-fascist. And he said that part of what was driving him was concern about what immigration was doing to the environment. So I'm not saying we take these guys literally, but what I am saying is that I believe the days of overt climate change denial of the kind that you're very used to in DC, I think its days are numbered. And I would say to you that the only thing scarier than an unhinged far-right racist who denies the reality of climate change is an unhinged far-right racist who doesn't deny the reality of climate change. Because we've been working on this idea that it's somehow about, convincing that guy to that if he, reads the latest IPCC report, he's going to decide, to join the Paris Accord. No, because once he understands that climate change is real, and if this supremacist ideology is not challenged and is in fact encouraged by all of these leaders, then that becomes the justification for allowing people to die. And this is not a future thing. This is happening. This is happening. This is the ideology that allows people to die in the thousands. So, what I argue in the book is we have a choice between what I'm calling climate barbarism and this shift in values that is represented by the Green New Deal. This is about what kind of people we want to be in the face of the reality that we are in it. We have to do everything possible to prevent catastrophic climate change, keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees. But even if we do that, we are facing a future with climate shocks in it, because we're seeing it already with 1 degree, and we don't have a hope of keeping it below 1.5, and even that is the biggest ask of our lives. So the question is, what kind of people are we going to be, right? So people say, well, why is there health care? What's all this justice stuff doing in the Green New Deal? Because this is about what kind of people we're going to be. Are we going to take care of each other? And this is going to determine whether or not, when the shocks come, whether or not people survive, right? I mean, look at Puerto Rico. The 3,000 people or more who died after Hurricane Maria, it's not because of falling debris. It was because of a collapsing healthcare and electricity grid that had been systematically neglected under years of economic austerity and colonial economic policies. We have to invest in the public sphere and in the infrastructure of care, because the times we're headed for are hard, and we have to decide if we believe that human beings have value by right of their being human. We really have to decide on that question, right?
What do you say to those who hear all of that and say, this climate emergency, it's too urgent, and we don't have time for all that. Those are sort of nice to haves, Medicare for all, but they're not necessary, and we need to do what's necessary. And they have various other fixes that they prefer, carbon taxes, even playing around with geoengineering. What do you say to that line of argument, which does seem to be sort of rising now that more and more people are awake to the urgency?
Well, it's interesting because you hear these counter arguments in the face of the proposal of a Green New Deal framework, right? That it would be easier to have just a carbon-focused approach. But what I don't understand is that the United States government has been talking about having a climate policy for 30 years, and it doesn't have one, right? And it has, up till now, has only been talking about that carbon-based approach. We've only been talking about cap and trade, type of policies here in DC, and they haven't had the political power to get them through. So this idea that is suddenly easy, I don't really understand. What I have seen up until recently with the polling, because now if you poll Americans about climate change, for the first time, not only is there a clear majority of Americans who understand that climate change is happening, understand that humans are causing it, but when you ask them to gauge their level of urgency, majorities say that they consider it to be an urgent issue, and in some cases it polls on par with healthcare. But up until quite recently, what would happen is that even among Democrats who said that they cared about climate change and understood that humans were causing it, if you asked them to rank the issues, they would reliably put climate change last. And it wasn't even close to healthcare and jobs, and education, the so-called bread and butter issues. And so one way of dealing with that, as a climate activist, is just to say, like, no, you have to care about this. It's the end of the world. None of that will matter. There won't be any schools on a dead planet. Or you can say, all right, how do we figure out how to lower emissions in line with science while investing in schools and healthcare and creating millions of unionized jobs? Maybe that would make it more popular, not less, right? Because those are actually the most popular issues in this country. In France, we have a kind of exhibit A of what happens when you have that narrow carbon approach and you don't tackle systemic injustices. Emmanuel Macron has overseen policies of relentless economic austerity. He's attacked trade union rights in France. He's handed out tax breaks to millionaires and corporations. And he imposed a price on carbon and said, this is how we're going to deal with climate change. And lo and behold, he inspired the Gilets jaunes yellow vest uprising. And he rolled it back. So even if you don't agree with the justice part, like even if you just really don't think people should have health care for some reason, it's actually not practical because people are resisting policies that offload the costs onto working people who are already so overstressed because our economy is so unequal and unfair. And so fairness actually gets the job done. Unfairness makes us lose time we don't have. France doesn't have a price on carbon now because of this, right? So if we understand that we have a decade, we actually just don't have time to treat this as a single issue. Sunrisers are great.
It's clear that you're conscious in your writing and speaking about the importance of electoral politics to making a lot of this possible, but you're also very interested in a different kind of organizing. So I wonder, what you would say about how people should most effectively engage in this fight in the next year as we're facing a very critical election that will have a huge impact on, humanity's ability to do anything about this crisis.
Yeah. So I think it's, like as I said, I think it's both. It's, every single star has to align politically, and we need to be organizing counterpowers and mass movements at an unprecedented scale. And that's why it is useful to awaken the historical memory of the old New Deal, because there was both. And it wasn't a time where people were saying one mattered, the other didn't. It mattered that you had a government that was open, and it mattered that it was the high point of trade union militancy and organization and organization of other aspects of society that was able to push. I mean, it is hard to, not every government can be pushed in the same way. I mean, I don't know, some of you maybe remember mass demonstrations against the Iraq War, right? We know what it's like to try to push governments that cannot be pushed. The problem is sometimes that when we have governments that can be pushed, we relax, right? And we did that a little bit during the first Obama term. And so what I love about the Sunrise Movement, and they have a table outside, and you should all sign up, and they are going to give you some really good direction about how to plug in to this momentum. You don't have to, I understand that you can just be young at heart, is that correct? Okay. They've opened it up, not just a youth movement, also a movement for people who are young at heart. I think what's exciting about what Sunrise is doing is that they are both organizing that outside counterpower and are absolutely determined to hold their political friends accountable, right? I mean, I think some of you probably first heard about Sunrise shortly after the Democrats took back the House, and maybe were expecting, confetti and a victory parade, and instead Sunrise occupied Nancy Pelosi's office, right? And people heard about the Green New Deal. So I think it's exactly that kind of spirit that is going to get the job done, but on a much, much larger scale. So I think we need sectoral organizing, right? So we need, I'll give you an example. So before I moved to the U.S. to work at Rutgers, I was involved in a project in Canada. It was kind of like a proto-Green New Deal called the LEAP Manifesto. And so we came up with this movement-led political platform. And then we started working with different sectors to map what this rapid transition to renewable energy with justice at the center would mean for them. So we worked with the postal workers who were having a crisis because the government was trying to privatize the post office. So instead of just saying, don't do that, they said, okay, we have a counter plan for what the post office should be. We know people get mail differently now. We don't just want things to be the same, but why should we sell off this valuable public infrastructure? Let's transform it and put it at the center of the transition to the next economy. So we came up with a plan with their members for the post office of the future, which would have solar panels on rooftops, charging stations out front, postal banking, lending to communities so that they can have community-owned and controlled renewable energy, a domestically made fleet of postal vehicles, which is already the largest domestic fleet of vehicles. Why not make it electric? Why not make it domestically, create a whole bunch of jobs? And then they came up with these ideas that they don't just have to deliver the mail. They could also be delivering locally grown produce. And they could, seeing as they knock on more doors than anyone, they could also be checking in on the elderly, which is something that postal workers do in France and Japan. So they completely reimagined this piece of public infrastructure so that it was about the economy of care and the low-carbon economy. And it was a really beautiful process. I think this should be happening in every workplace. I think we need to be we need to be organizing for what a Green New Deal means for education, what it means for healthcare, what it means for tech, and this is starting to happen. We're starting to see sectoral Green New Deal groups forming to do this kind of mapping, right? So at this point, it's a rough draft. It's a short resolution. But if you read the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Ed Markey resolution, it calls for this kind of democratic, grassroots, ground-up design. The original plan, as some of you may remember, was for there to be a House committee that would have been spending this whole year having town halls, canvassing experts, helping people do this democratization process and designing the Green New Deal collectively. And that battle was lost. So that means this has to be done in a much more self-organized way, right? No one's going to do this for us. There is no central committee that's going to go, you do this, you do that. So this, I think, is not instead of electoral politics. I actually think this is part of what motivates people to vote, is a vision for what they want instead of what we have now.
Absolutely. So I'd like to welcome up to the stage the amazing actress and activist Jane Fonda.
inviting me to be here. I'm so honored. I brought my book. I wish you could see it. I don't know if any of you can see it. It's just about every page is dog-eared. And there's writing all over it.
You've had it for 2 weeks, and
right. Yeah. Like a lot of people, maybe a lot of you. I've been a climate activist. I'm involved in a lot of things, but I was feeling really bad. I was feeling bad in my skin. I knew that I wasn't doing enough. But what to do? You know, when you're famous, okay, well, how do I use my celebrity? And as very often happens if you're a good person, on Labor Day weekend, I received an advance copy of Naomi's book, and I've read all of Naomi's books, and so I knew it was a treat. I didn't know that it would change my life. It told me what I had to do, and it motivated me to do it. I just wanted to say a couple of things about why this was true. In the beginning of the book, Naomi writes about Greta Thunberg. And most of us have heard of Greta. I didn't know that Greta is on the spectrum. She has what was called Asperger's disease. And Naomi explained what this means. People with Asperger's who are on the spectrum aren't affected by what other people think they should be or think they should feel or think they should do. There's a kind of clarity. It's a laser focus. If they get interested in something, clear, and that's it. And when she was very young, Greta started studying climate change and environmentalism. And the more she read and the more she learned, she realized the truth. This is like a train rocketing towards us, and nobody is behaving appropriately, including her parents. And it upset her so much that she was traumatized into not speaking and not eating for a year. And I don't know about you, that just hit me like a thunderbolt. This young person who was so clear saw the truth and got traumatized. And of course, what was so great is what eventually got her out of the trauma was what the students were doing, the Parkland students in Florida. Action has a way of doing that. Gets you out of grief and despair. And so she began her every Friday sitting in front of the Swedish parliament with a sign that said in Swedish on wood, "School strike for climate." And when I read that, I knew that this is a time when we have to get out of our comfort zone, when we have to disrupt business as usual and go further. And the other thing that's so wonderful about Naomi's book is that she gives this vision of the good things that can happen. You know, she says, yes, we are facing a climate crisis, but we're also facing an empathy crisis. The fabric of society is unraveling. And since we have to redo it, why not do it right? Right? First of all, we'll get more support doing it that way. Secondly, it's the right thing to do. But also, as Naomi points out, so much warming is already baked in. Things are going to get a lot worse. Even if we do everything right starting now, it's going to get a lot worse. We're going to be so much better able to deal with it if we feel respected, if we're earning a decent wage, if we care for each other, if, you know, we can handle it better. I mean, we have to stick together, man. We have to march in unprecedented numbers and stick together and love each other and make this happen. And we can't stop until we do. And so I'm really grateful. This is really important. I agree with that New York Times writer. We should buy millions and give it to everybody. And I'm so grateful to the Sunrise Movement, to the young people. I'm a grandma, man. I'm going to stand with you guys as a grandmother. Cross generations, we have to stick together. So thanks, Naomi. Oh my God. There's a lot of grandmas in here, I can see. I'm wearing a hat because I'm letting my hair go gray and it doesn't look very good right now.
What's one thing that's amazing, one of the many amazing things about the global youth movement and Greta is that it's not only about protests and rallies, right? Like there are new forms of protest emerging, and it's this generation that has these amazing instincts about how to use the online space and just what Greta's done in the last few days. How she confronted Congress with the IPCC report. I mean, I wonder, you in your theatrical background, do you appreciate that aspect of the new activism?
I do, yes. I'm going to be doing some of it myself. I'm not going to announce it now, but because of Greta and because of the Sunshine Movement, Sunrise Movement, I'm sorry, but it's sunshine too. Sunrise Movement. I said I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and put my body on the line, and you'll be hearing about it. And it's got to be creative. FDR included so many artists in the New Deal, so we have to do that this time. We have to bring we're in a civilizational transition, and artists are the best people, writers, painters, poets, sculptors, in helping us move into the new period. That's what art is for, and there's so many artists stepping up to the task.
Yeah, I'm so excited by this because it's one of the things about the original New Deal that I love the most, is that it ushered in a artistic renaissance, and there was so much funding for public art. Much of it is still around, but just hundreds upon hundreds of murals, tens of thousands of theater productions, much of it really avant-garde. And it was democratic. It was this idea that art is not for just coastal elites. Everybody has a right to art, right? And one of the things about art is that it's low carbon. It doesn't burn a lot of carbon to put on a play with your friends, or to get a bunch of kids together and paint a mural. And so, as we head into this rocky future, there are things we're going to have to contract, right? Like 70% of the world's emissions are emitted by the top richest 20%. And the fact that we've turned shopping into our main communal activity is a problem. But what all of the research shows is that what actually makes us happy is not that. That's how capitalism works. It doesn't make you happy, so you have to do it again, right? But what makes people happy is time with friends, in community, time in nature, art. So we need to explode the idea that this is elitist, and we also need to celebrate it as low carbon work, right? And so I'm just so excited because I feel like we have a crisis of imagination. That's one of the biggest problems we're up against, is actually we've been failed by Hollywood. They keep showing us visions of the future where we're just ourselves, only worse, right? And the idea that artists could really step into this and help us imagine our way out of this is, to me, so exciting, Jade. So I want to thank you so much for your courage, and just I love that this movement is intergenerational as well. If you look at the cultures that have struggled for hundreds of years, their movements are intergenerational. I mean, Jane and I were at Standing Rock. One of the things that was most beautiful about that was the respect for elders and the wisdom that comes from a life of commitment. And I just want to say, I think you are such a hero, and you've led such an amazing life of commitment. So thank you for what you are doing.
For your inspiration and for rendering it. There's a lot of books have been written. There's a lot of experts that know a lot. There's something about the way that Naomi writes that is so accessible, that touches your heart, and that makes you say, yeah. Not everybody does that, So thank you, Naomi, so much.
You'll be able to say you were here when, whatever Jane does next. We'll find out.
Come and join me when you hear about it. It'll be in D.C.
I wonder, Jane, you have been an activist for a long time, and you've experienced many different movements. What do you think is different about this movement?
Well, what is different? It's human survival is at stake. I remember, after the terrible elections of 2016, and some very prominent women said to me, "Well, it'll be 4 years, and then we're gonna." And I said, "But no, we don't have 4 years to lose. This is different than any other time we've ever had. There's all of these issues that we're all dealing with, but there's this overarching issue, which is that we can be destroyed. We can not have a livable future. These young people may not have a future that can be lived in, and that's never really existed before. So we're grappling with something that's unknown and that requires every single ounce of our courage and commitment, no matter who we are. I think it's just so great that Greta is on the spectrum. It can also be very hard. Naomi writes about how she's teased in schools, before she became so famous, but she calls it her superpower. This ability to see clearly is her superpower. Take that, everybody that's on the spectrum. You've got a superpower. Use it.
I think it's really special. It's been a big gift to the world in one way because there is a crisis of attention, right? And that has been exacerbated by the Trump era and the media and the way Trump has been covered, because we're just completely sucked into this daily drama of what is the terrible thing that he said today. And she's managed to just shift the framework.
Right, and I think that one of the things I write about in the book is the problem of mistiming when it comes with to the climate crisis, that it lands on our lap in this moment where our economic system has made us feel uniquely incapable of dealing with it, which is why you can have these appeals to human nature that people like Jonathan Franzen are making more and more about. We just can't think long term. We're just too sort of selfish and focused just on our immediate gratification. And it is true that this is what the economic system that we've had for the past 40, 50 years has told us, that we are just the collection of our wants, right? And that democracy is just, voting for the color of your tie, as Milton Friedman said, right? And that we make trouble when we try to do things collectively, right? Milton Friedman said to Augusto Pinochet in a letter that I quote in the Shock Doctrine, that things went wrong when we started to think that we could do good things with other people's money. He was talking about the New Deal. And so this idea has taken root, and everybody under 50 has just grown up in it, which is freedom is shopping. Freedom is just fulfilling those wants. And there's something suspicious, actually, about trying to do things collectively. Things go terribly wrong when people try to do things collectively. Human nature is not one thing. We are complicated creatures, us humans, right? I mean, we are selfish and we are generous, right? And we do think just short term without consequences. And there are humans on this planet who know how to think 7 generations into the future and 7 generations into the past. We can be many things as humans, and the different systems that we live under encourage different parts of ourselves. And so this is why I think it's important that we talk about values, not just policies. It's about what values we're going to encourage, what sorts of culture we're going to encourage in ourselves. The tech companies have done a fantastic job of having us, run around in technological circles chasing the next dopamine hit, right? We have these moments. Like, I don't think Greta is unique in her sense of existential fear and her clarity that of what needs to be done. Every kid I've ever met, if you tell them about climate change, goes like, "Well, we have to stop doing that." Every single kid has that reaction. Yeah. But most of us, with more neurotypical wiring, I mean, I know a little bit about this because I know a lot of kids on the spectrum, and most of us do this thing called mirroring. We look to each other to learn how to behave, right? And that's usually really helpful to build cohesive community. The problem is, if you live in a society that is run by polluters and the politicians who pay them, and it's an economic system that's built on infinite growth and profit, then that mirroring becomes a problem, because you're like, one minute you're looking at an image of walruses jumping to their death, and you're going, like, what are we going to do? And you're forwarding links to your friends, and the next minute you're like, how do they do that facial contouring thing? And what did Trump just tweet? And our brains are being scrambled by these, in part by these technologies. And so I think there is a superpower with some of these kids who don't mirror, right? Who trust their first instincts. And now they're helping those of us with more typical wiring trust our first instincts, right? And go, yeah, wait a minute, why aren't we acting like our house is on fire, right? And it's so interesting because there's this, the reason you're not supposed to say the house is on fire in a crowded theater is, if it's a false alarm, people will start running, right? But you are supposed to say the house is on fire if the house is on fire, right? Because people will start running, and you want them to run, you want them to leap, you want them to do all of those things. I was talking earlier about the fires of climate change and the fires of far right, this dangerous, hateful far right ideology that looks different in different countries but manifests in similar ways. But there is a third fire. I really believe that, and that is the fire of this movement, of this growing movement, and this clarity and determination that so many young people have, and that are inspiring as in real time, as we see, and we are going to see it on Friday, right? We have been called to join this strike. Not just young people, but we have been called to disrupt our business as usual. And it's going to be a day, but it's going to be an important day, because it's going to be a day where we manifest the fact that we cannot just sleepwalk into this. We have to disrupt business as usual, and that's good. It's a muscle we need to start using. Right? And we're going to use it in different ways in different contexts. But Friday's going to be really important, and I hope all of you find a way to participate if you can do that.
Naomi, on the eve of the climate strike, I wanted to ask if you would read this brief and very powerful passage from the introduction of your wonderful book.
All right. Okay. All right. It's good. Yeah. All right. So this is from the end of the introduction. The message coming from the school strikes is that a great many young people are ready for this kind of deep change. They know all too well that the sixth mass extinction is not the only crisis they have inherited. They are also growing up in the rubble of market euphoria, in which the dreams of endlessly rising living standards have given way to rampant austerity and economic insecurity. And techno-utopianism, which imagined a frictionless future of limitless connection and community, has morphed into addiction to the algorithms of envy, relentless corporate surveillance, and spiraling online misogyny and white supremacy. Quote, "Once you have done your homework," Greta Thunberg says, "you realize we need new politics. We need a new economics, where everything is based on our rapidly declining and extremely limited carbon budget. But that is not enough. We need a whole new way of thinking. We must stop competing with each other. We need to start cooperating and sharing the remaining resources of this planet in a fair way." Unquote. Because our house is on fire, and this should come as no surprise. Built on false promises, discounted futures, and sacrificial people, it was rigged to blow from the start. It's too late to save all of our stuff, but we can still save each other and a great many species too. Let's put out the flames and build something different in its place, something a little less ornate, but with room for all of those who need shelter and care. Let's forge a global Green New Deal for everyone this time. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jane, for being here. It's been so wonderful to have you. And thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Politics and Prose.